Well, moving now to Wikileaks and its founder, Julian Assange. As of today, he is officially a wanted man. Interpol announcing an arrest warrant for Assange related to a sex case in Sweden. His current whereabouts are unknown. Meantime, the Wikileaks founder calling for Hillary Clinton to resign in an interview with Time magazine.
She should resign if it can be shown that she was responsible for ordering U.S. Diplomatic figures to engage in espionage activities at the United Nations in violation of the international covenants to which the U.S. has signed up. Yes, she should resign over that.
And today we have part 3 of the DR file, our week-long series on the Wikileaks revelations, not for the gossip, but for the policy. This time focused on Pakistan, the leaked cables revealing that U.S. Special Forces have indeed been operating inside Pakistan. Basically everything that you suspect was true apparently is. The U.S. was rebuffed in its attempt to secure Pakistan's nuclear materials, and that Pakistan still supports militants, including those behind the Mumbai terror attack, while taking money from you, the American taxpayer. Friend or foe, I ask? Joining us now, Lt.Col.Tony Shaffer from the Center for Advanced Studies and author of Operation Dark Heart. And joining Tony for today's Pakistan conversation, Christine Fair out of Georgetown University. And Tony, what is the current context of the U.S. relationship as it's presented at the State Department with Pakistan?
Well, the public face obviously is very different than the private face, and we've seen a glimpse of this. We've talked about this. The bottom line here is this. The complexities of that relationship have resulted in no progress relating to either making sure that the Pakistan nuclear program is secure. Now it's more apparent than ever that there are huge problems there. And most importantly, to our own effort regarding Afghanistan, the safe haven issue remains. This idea that we have special operations forces working in Pakistan. I've heard rumor of this. I've had friends tell me this was going on. But the bottom line is it's not sufficient to actually. It's like putting your finger in a dam. You're not really making any headway relating to the fact that we have to have not only special forces advising or assisting. I think if we're going to be making any real headway, you've got to work jointly with all the forces on both sides of the border simultaneously. One of the things, Dylan, has been promised to us, General Kayani, the commander of the Pakistani forces, promised to go into these areas, promises to Admiral Mike Mullen earlier this year. No such effort has been made to this date. So therefore, you got to really wonder, are they really cooperating in the end?
How badly, in your view, Christine, is Pakistan taking advantage of the United States?
Well, that's kind of a weird question to ask. It's actually not quite that straightforward. It's easy to look at where Pakistan has failed because those failures are strikingly evident. But, for example, with respect to the nuclear program, I don't actually agree with the previous interlocutor. In fact, Pakistan has made pretty impressive strides in trying to make its nuclear program more secure, most notably with the establishment of the Strategic Plans Division. The fact that there are continued concerns about terrorists getting their hands on nuclear material is a different issue. The fact is, Pakistan has done has gone considerable way to try to make that program more secure. The other issue is that much of the domestic insurgency that Pakistan is currently confronting along the tribal areas and the federally administered tribal areas are in large part due to a combination of our putting pressure on the Pakistanis to go into al-Qaeda safe havens as early as 2002, but with considerable insistence in 2004, coupled with significant backlash from a long history of supporting Islamist militants. So Pakistan is a very troublesome ally, but Pakistan would also argue that its own difficulties have been compounded significantly in its relationship with the United States. And I think that's a fair rebuttal.
Yeah. When you look at the whole blowback concept, you hear a lot about it in Afghanistan, obviously, with the United States funding and developing the Taliban in the 1980s to try to fight the Russians effectively. How much of a blowback issue do we have, not just in Afghanistan with the Taliban, Tony, but in Pakistan and throughout that entire region, because the power dynamic has shifted so much, and we've invested so much over the past 30 years in military development that now we're fighting the very people we trained in many of these countries?
Right. Well, I agree with Christina in the fact that we have helped exacerbate the situation by the fact that any country, and I think this is universal, any country is always going to act in its own best interests. The Pakistanis, if you look back on this, have always acted in their interest. The problem is we pressure them and sometimes to work against their own interest. They're going into the safe havens as counterintuitive to the fact that they use jihadists for their own purposes in Kashmir. They see this as a very effective tool against the Indians. I was talking to someone today who was actually from that region. He said this is common. They commonly use, the Pakistani encourage the use of jihad against specific targets. That's why we've seen the Haqqani network used so effectively against Indian interests in Afghanistan. So we've got to look at this from their perspective, and I don't think we've done a good job of doing that.
What is Pakistan's primary concern relative to its relationship with the U.S. as you see it, Christine?
Well, I think there are a couple of issues. Pakistan is economically in a perpetual crisis. In fact, I think we can call Pakistan a compounding crisis, and there's always multiple crises that Pakistan reels from. So it does need the United States to continue supporting it with bilateral assistance, obviously supporting Pakistan's position at the IMF. Let's not forget the flood that affected an area that's equivalent to the entire U.S. eastern seaboard. In addition to that, it has a long-standing military competition with India, for which it seeks continued accumulation of conventional weapon systems that are suitable for that conflict, and where its expectations from the United States become most interesting and complicated is actually with respect to Afghanistan itself. Many of Pakistan's security concerns can really be reduced down to the India problem. And so the security position that the United States maintains vis-a-vis Afghanistan in the near and distant future are going to be very important for Pakistan, particularly with respect to their anticipated space that the Indians may have to accumulate as well as to consolidate their power in Afghanistan. Power is the wrong word. Influence in Afghanistan to Pakistan's detriment. So Pakistan seeks to get from us about as comprehensive a list of goodies as we seek to get from Pakistan.
Real quick, Tony, how much of a nuclear threat is Pakistan? Not in the institutional sense, but in the unaccounted for sense.
I did a study of this last year, and I think the administration's position of downplaying any risk is the wrong one. Sticking your head in the sand and hoping for the best is not a policy. It's a recipe for disaster. This is the deal. They've got a lot of weapons. They have 130,000 folks involved in the nuclear program. And look what happened with Bradley Manning. One guy, if it's true, if he did this leak for Wikileaks, think of what an insider would do, linking that with an outside threat. The threat is real. I think it's inevitable. Eventually something's going to happen. They've had 7 credible attempts over the past 3 years by the Taliban and Al-Qaeda to penetrate their program. It's just a matter of time before something happens. All
right. On that note, I will thank both of you for enhancing my understanding and everybody else who's joined us this afternoon. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Tony. We'll see you tomorrow. Tony joining us all week for our continuing series on the WikiLeaks revelations. Tomorrow, a look at Saudi Arabia, the same country that funds Al-Qaeda, who launches terrorist attacks on America. We sell arms to Saudi Arabia, and then Saudi Arabia suggests we invade Iran to protect ourselves from Al-Qaeda.